Well, it's an issue that's making headlines today, but a story that's been developing for some time, a fight for some time over how unions can do business in Missouri. And it looks like that fight could be over. It's a law known as Right to Work, a priority of Missouri's new governor, and it just passed by state legislators. Those fighting for and against Right to Work say the change will be historic for Missouri. They just disagree passionately over whether it would be good or bad for people's paychecks. Tonight, we go past the talking points and ask what right to work could mean for jobs and wages in the Show Me State. So we hope you'll stay tuned. Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. Simply put, so-called right-to-work legislation bars unions from requiring dues as a condition of employment in businesses where they bargain on behalf of employees. Workers can still organize and unions can still represent them, but members could get the services of a union without paying for them, potentially making it financially infeasible for unions to stay together. Opponents say right to work is union busting. Backers say it makes unions more responsive to the people they represent. This is not the first time Missouri lawmakers have passed right to work legislation.
This is a big place.
It's just the first time they've done so with a governor in office who has promised to sign it into law. And Missouri won't be the first state to make the switch in recent years. In 2012, Indiana and Michigan both became right-to-work states, states long considered union strongholds. Opponents of the law say it could cause unions to fold and drive down wages for their members and others who depend on unions to set pay standards. Supporters say right to work makes Missouri more attractive to new businesses and will mean more jobs for the Show Me State. And both sides try to use stats from recent right to work states to prove their points. Okay, if you've fought for or against it or even just followed it closely, you may kind of know the nuances of this law, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. Helping us do that is Brad Kafka. He's Vice Chair, Labor and Employment Practice Group over at Pocinelli. Housekeeping, Pocinelli does sponsor some programming here at the 9 Network.
And we're proud to do so.
Well, thank you for saying that. Okay, so help us define right to work. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think you did a good job right at the very beginning of summarizing. Right to work, and it's not a clear, it's really a misnomer in many ways. It's certainly not a clear title for what the laws in most states and soon the law in this state will require. It basically prohibits employers and unions from agreeing that employees must maintain union membership to remain employed.
Unions can still organize.
Unions can organize as they always have, but a disadvantage for them is that not every employee who in a group they organize may pay union dues. They will not be obliged to do so.
Will the unions be obliged to represent them? If I'm in a union at XYZ company and I now exercise my so-called right to work, stop paying my dues, when it comes time for negotiations between the company and the employees, the union still has to represent me?
Yes. One aspect of the right to work law in Missouri and everywhere is that the union still has a statutory obligation to represent all of the employees in the group or unit it represents. And that's true whether the employees are paying dues or paying some other fee or they're paying nothing at all. So the obligation is the same regardless of whether someone pays for the representation or not.
Has nothing to do with the contract they've written between the union and the employer.
It has in the past, and there were in the past provisions called union security provisions, and those exist in Missouri now, and they exist in states where there is no right to work law. And those provisions require employees to maintain or to pay dues or an equivalent payment in order to maintain their employment. After right to work passes, as it will in Missouri soon, then there is no obligation to make payment, and the union still has an obligation to represent.
Real quickly, it's passed the state legislature with the governor, we believe, will sign it. Will it go? Do we know if it will go into effect immediately, or do it in August when most laws do?
It'll go into effect in August. There's no
Okay.
emergency provision in there, so it'll go into effect in August as most statutes do. And I think it's almost a certainty that the governor will sign it. He could sign it as early as
Friday.
tomorrow.
Okay, for different reasons, you hear both sides say this is an issue that affects Missourians regardless of whether they're union members or not. So for those, Right to Work say it will do what? Regardless of if you are on either side of this issue, they say it will have an impact on you, regardless of if you're in a union. Help break that down for us. If I'm in a union, if I'm not in a union, why might this be something I care about?
Well, if you're not in a union, there may be opportunities for your employer that don't exist now. Some would argue because it would be hard for employers that are not union to work in certain environments. Certain construction environments might be examples of that. On the other hand, if you are not in a union and you would like to be in a union, it's much less likely that unions will organize now because they will be concerned that if they spend the time and the money organizing, they will not receive dues from those they represent or payments from those they represent.
Do you see unions going away in Missouri, whether gradually or drastically?
I don't see unions going away, but I see the number of employees represented by unions decreasing, and I think that'll happen on a gradual basis. And I think the number of groups of employees who are represented, or units of employees represented by unions, will also decrease.
Unions would tell us that the wages will go down. Do we know that?
Well,
if fewer people are in unions.
I think there's a reasonable argument for that, but I question whether there's rigorous research on it. The reasonable argument is that unions have always pushed for higher wages and for higher benefits, and in many or even most cases they've been successful. It also has a carryover to the non-union sector because in most states, including Missouri, we have what's called the prevailing wage law. And that prevailing wage law requires whoever works on a government contract, in Missouri we're talking about a state contract, to pay the prevailing wage. And that prevailing wage is usually the union rate. I won't go into how that's calculated. It's different for the federal government and the state government. But in each case, there's a prevailing wage. To the extent that there's fewer union employees and union employers, the union rate is less likely to be the prevailing rate, and therefore wage rates are likely to go down. That is anecdotal. I mean, you will hear, I think, later that there are reasonable arguments both ways.
Will there be more jobs? That's the argument from the governor and those who have been trying to pass this for some time.
Again, you'll hear contrary arguments soon, but one has to ask, is that something that really is Right to Work something that will really cause someone or an employer to move to this state or to increase its presence in the state? There are a lot of factors that go into employer decisions. Is the absence of mandatory union contributions a factor? Yes, it could be a factor. Do I think it's going to have a meaningful impact on the number of employees or the number of jobs that exist? I think it's doubtful. I mean, there's so many other factors. If you happen to have thousands of miles of beachfront, that's a good thing. If you find oil or gas and you can access it by new technology, which we call fracking, that might help increase jobs.
It sounds like you're saying there are a lot of variables.
Many independent variables, and I don't think that this one will be determinative.
All right. Well, as you said, we are about to hear more arguments on both sides, and we hope you'll help us wade through it as we do at the next discussion. Before then, though, last month, my colleague and fearless leader at KSDK, Mike Bush, had a chance to sit down with the new governor, Governor Eric Greitens from Missouri, just as he was about to take office, talking Right to Work. And then we also caught up with a St. Louis area state representative. Here are their thoughts on some common themes we've heard around this issue.
I think it's essential that we pass right-to-work legislation, as 27 other states have done, and I'm going to call on the legislature to do that. Other important reforms, including workers' compensation reform, we need to take a close look at prevailing wage and project labor agreements, all of those things that stand in between the people of Missouri and more jobs and higher pay.
I think it's going to cut wages. A lot of the friends I have are people I know that are business owners that are not necessarily union, but they say now they're going to have to pay their people less because that's what the market is going to demand when you bring in right to work. It'll affect everyone in this state. They're saying it'll bring jobs. It may bring jobs, but low-paying jobs.
Let me introduce who else we have at the table here. From the Labor Tribune, the publisher, Ed Finkelstein. Ed, thanks for being here. And with the name like Labor Tribune, we know that you are fighting for or reporting on issues from the labor perspective, from the union perspective. Giving us a different perspective is Dan Fritz, a partner at McMahon Berger, a firm where you do some labor law and some litigation on the behalf of the management side, I guess we could say. Is that a fair assessment, gentlemen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, very good. Then I shall proceed and treat the witnesses as very congenial. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it, and Brad's still with us as well. Ed,
Well,
you're closest to me. I'll start with you. Go
Okay.
ahead. It looks like you're chomping at the bit.
Yes, the reality is right to work's wrong for all Missourians. Eric Greitens here talked about more jobs. He talked about in many of his statements wanting to help the workers of Missouri, when in fact Eric Greitens has not even met with the leadership of labor unions to find out the other side of this law, what the real facts are in terms of how it's going to hurt Missouri. As far as I'm concerned, the governor is a political coward. He didn't want to know that right to work is going to reduce wages in the state, ultimately, not right away, but ultimately. He didn't want to know that in right to work states, the injury rates and death rates are higher because there's less safety laws. He didn't want to know that educational spending in right-to-work states is lower. He's talking about a $500 million shortfall in the budget, and education's already taken a big cut. People are going to find it even more difficult in terms of education for their kids. Fewer workers have health insurance in right-to-work states. He didn't want to know all of that. And so I'm saying that the governor was a coward, a political coward. For being a Navy SEAL, I think it's outrageous, and he ought to be ashamed of himself not getting the facts on the other side of the issue before he steps in and say we ought to have this, because the facts that he spouted are absolutely wrong.
All right, well, in all fairness, we don't have the governor here to defend himself or anyone from his camp, but let me just real directly ask you, are you worried that this is the end of unions in Missouri?
No, it's not the end of unions in Missouri. The unions will survive. We've survived a lot worse, and we'll do the same here. But it's going to make it harder for unions to survive because they have to spend union dues monies from their members on non-members to provide all services. And as the union gets weaker financially, its ability to fight management for things that they need is even lessened. A company has overhead. A union has overhead. That's what dues cover, an overhead, to be able to support the organization going forward.
This is clearly a day that Ed has not been looking forward to. Dan, I'm curious, are you excited about this? Because this is not the first time it's passed. We've just never had a governor who was willing to sign it. For all of the things we just heard from there, I know we've heard a lot from folks who are for this, that they think it will do right for Missouri.
I agree with that 100%. It was clear when our politicians ran for office over the last year that right to work was a top priority to this state. Our elected officials recognized the fact that right to work brought potential for economic growth. I think it's unfair to attack the governor saying he didn't weigh both sides. This is clearly something that he's contemplated, he's discussed a number of times throughout his campaign of why he believed right to work was best for the state.
Yeah, he certainly didn't make a secret of it when he ran. This was something
no
he
doubt
said
about
he would
it.
do.
But he kept saying this is better for the state because he was being fed that information by the Chamber of Commerce and large companies that want to see unions knocked down. He didn't bother to find the other side. That's why I say he's a political coward, because he didn't take the time to find out what the other side is. He talks about creating new jobs. The reality is in the last year, from November to November, Missouri created more jobs than all the right-to-work neighbors around us. And we've got a little chyron.
Yeah, you did. You pointed this out to us. We found it through a source of the the Bureau of Labor Statistics that we were able to verify for ourselves. So
Right.
this is not Ed's material. This is something from the U.S. government here. And so,
In Missouri, in creating jobs, last year ranked number 10 in the nation. So to say that this is going to create more jobs makes no sense because Missouri's already creating a lot of jobs. As I said, more than our right to work neighbors
okay, let me get
around
Dan
us.
back in here. Jump in, Dan.
Sure.
How do you see it?
I think it's more than a coincidence that when this bill went through, not only last year and this year, you had labor attorneys, you had consultants who have talked to a number of employers that say, we're contemplating about relocating to the state of Missouri or somewhere in the Midwest. We would like to know some of the issues. And I'm not saying right to work is the only issue, but it is one of the issues that they came up in the equation.
Why? What do they like about a right to work state? I mean, I guess it could seem obvious. They think it could be a lower cost of business, but is that it, or is there something else that we're not looking at?
No, I think they believe that it's bringing opportunities for them. Typically, right to work states are perceived as more employer friendly. And whatever that they're relying upon to form that perception, that's well supported by the fact that more and more states are going to right to work. If you look at Missouri, and Missouri's trying to decide whether they want to remain competitive in bringing new employers to the state, and an employer says we want to come to the Midwest and decide whether there's something of, this is where we want to locate our business. With the exception of Illinois, every state around Missouri has gone right to work. So it's a factor that when you're trying to decide that, it puts Missouri at a disadvantage when these employers who are saying that they're taking it into consideration,
Okay.
it's already a strike against Missouri.
A lot of blue states that, in that map we just saw, blue representing right to work.
Right. Let me debunk that statement that employers look for right to work. Area Development Magazine, which has done interviews with business leaders and site selection experts, they do it on across the board for years, consistently, right to work has not even been in the top 10. And the regional chamber here in St. Louis did a study on it, and it shows that right to work was the 18th most important reason. They want to have good infrastructure. They want to have good trained employees. They want incentives. These things are more important than right to work. So to say that right to work is a major issue when employers and site selection experts say it's not, is just not understanding.
Of course, when you get to
the
that
truth.
18th, could that be the tipping point, that 18th reason?
One never knows, and I think it's fair to say that for some businesses, they look at whether a union is likely to form in the state, because whether we want to acknowledge it or not, many businesses would prefer to avoid a union situation, union representation.
Because it's cheaper to do business?
Because I think cost of doing business is one. I think they perceive it as a question of flexibility. There are employers who are concerned that they will lose flexibility if they have to bargain with the union. Now, we can argue about whether that's accurate or not. Reasonable people can differ on it. But I don't think we can argue about whether some employers really perceive that as to be a real concern. So, is it something that businesses balance? Yes. Is it the most important factor? No, I agree with Ed that there's a lot of other things. I mean, I'd like to see better infrastructure in schools myself. But I can't say that that in my experience representing clients, that there are no clients who would consider that. I think some will. And I think it could be a factor.
But Dan, you're saying the phone started ringing just as the momentum started gathering, regardless of whether it's the 18th or the first reason, the phone was ringing. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. It is still a factor that they are considering. Like I said, it may not be the only reason, but it is a factor that they're considering, and I've heard it's in the top 5 of big companies. So I think it's also, to go back to one of Ed's comments, the U.S. Bureau of Economics has done some studies, and over the last 10 years, jobs in right-to-work states have grown by 8.6% compared to 5% growth in states without right-to-work laws. So I think that to say that Missouri had one good year and they've jumped isn't a fair comparison when you look over the long term of what right-to-work states have done. And as our elected politicians have viewed and believed, there has been some benefit that they can look at statistical numbers and see that growth has actually come to these states that have gone to right-to-work. Now you're right. One year maybe.
So let's pick up on right. I just want to pick up. Let's see if we can, if it's possible, to go back to the map of the right-to-work states, because what you'll see in some of those states are some of the cities that are the fastest growing in the country. Is that a factor that you can account for? I mean, when you talk about the increase of jobs, these are also just some fast-growing cities in those states.
Well, I think Kansas City is a great example. If you look at Kansas City right now, Missouri does not have right to work currently. Kansas City has taken steps to be more employer friendly. And anybody you talk to that's in Kansas City is going to tell you all the new businesses, all the new jobs are going to the Kansas side of Kansas City. They're not staying in Missouri. And the big distinguishing factor in my mind is the fact that they've adopted right to work. It's more employer friendly.
You know, you take any single example as cherry picking data. The reality is that more jobs are created in Missouri, and so to say that Missouri is not employer friendly makes no sense. It is worker friendly.
I think most people would think Missouri, though, it's no Arizona in terms of like
No,
Phoenix.
well,
it's not
if we
growing
wanna-
like the Silicon Valley. It's
it's-
just generally kind of a flat economy.
And a lot of those right to work states are growing simply because they were so far behind. And so they have lower wages and they attract employers who want lower wages because they want to put more to their bottom line. That means their benefits are higher, the employer's benefits and perks are higher. The reality is if you want to have workers to have their fair share, then you need strong unions to help make that possible. Now, the unions understand companies have to be profitable. I mean, unions, when the big recession hit in '08, many unions gave up wage increases. They cut back on pension plans. They did a lot of things to help the company survive. So the unions are always concerned about that.
And Casey, what's interesting about this is that the data that Ed decided is correct. I mean, it comes, or we believe it's correct. It came, as you pointed out, from the federal government. The data that Dan cited is also from the same source. So people can make reasonable arguments about what right to work means and cite the same source and use it in different ways.
So why can't we get a definitive answer? These gentlemen are very passionate. I doubt they're going to agree on whether this is good or bad tonight. But if they're using the same source, why can't we know what will happen in Missouri definitively?
Well, I think there's two reasons, or at least two reasons. One is that taking aside the limited data we've talked about, I don't believe that studies done on this have been particularly rigorous. I mean, they often reflect the views of the party who paid for the study. Second, there's too many independent variables. In every state that we're talking about, and you both pointed it out, there's so many other things going on. We can't just look at right to work and isolate that and determine whether that's going to be absolutely beneficial to the state. I think on an intuitive basis, one can argue that perhaps more jobs will be created. On an intuitive basis, we can also argue that pay will probably go down. But that's anecdotal, and I don't think, and I'm not convinced.
I'm sorry, Brad, it's not anecdotal. We use the Bureau of Labor Statistics that shows average wages in right-to-work states are over $6,000 a year less. That means a family's putting less food on his table. It means he's buying less for his kids. It means he can't send his kids to private school if he wants to. So $6,000 is nothing to say.
What do you think about this?
The question is whether it's causal. I mean, what is a causal fact?
You're right. There's a lot of causes that require this, but you just have to look at the overview. He talked about the overview. That's the overview. And right-to-work states, it's $6,000 a year less in salary. Plus, for the family, everybody earning, it's over $8,000 a year less. So that's a lot of clothes on kids' backs, a lot of educational efforts for the family. It's a reality hurting individuals.
No, those are, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, but part of the problem with that, to say that people in non-right-to-work states make $6,000 more, when you look
Less,
at
not
less,
more,
I'm
less.
sorry, less. The problem with that is it's flawed, because when you do that comparison, actually, non-right-to-work states, when you look at and you consider the cost of living difference, there is all kinds of studies that come out. When you take in what the cost of living is, right-to-work states actually get paid more than non-right-to-work states.
How about this? This is a number that I don't think that checks out. The governor says since Indiana went right to work, just 2 states over, they have more union members. And that, I believe, is checked out. What do you say to that?
I say that is correct when it first went in. And the reason, because I talked to the Indiana AFL-CIO, is because union members were scared to death. So they started joining unions hoping for protections, because the contracts, as long as they're enforced, have the protections of the contract. The reality is now union membership, after a couple of years, has gone down. The same thing happened in Michigan. It started going up a little bit, and now it's going down.
Will
That's
different unions be affected
can I-
differently? I want to.
Could I just comment on that? That's exactly, absolutely wrong. Indiana, since it went to right-to-work state in became a right-to-work state in 2012, has seen a steady increase. The Bureau of Labor Statistics just put out their most recent report dated January 26, 2017, and they again, for another year, show that they have an increase in union membership.
Okay, let's leave it. Let's leave that point there because I see you both had
And
your
I have
statistics
charts
from the
that
same
show
bureau.
just
But I just want,
opposite.
we're running out of time, so I just want to say, will it affect different unions differently?
Yes, I don't think there's any question that it will, and it will affect different sectors, different industries differently. One industry, or that I think will be affected most, is the retail industry. And so, with respect to the unions, it's the unions who represent employees in that industry. So when we're talking about supermarkets that are represented by unions, I think they will be affected. They have many part-time employees who are not as attached to the union and are who pay dues, and I think those people are likely to or less likely to maintain their membership.
Versus?
Well, let me give you just one other example before I get to the
We have
verses.
45 seconds, so
Okay,
do
so
your-
another example would be those who work in hotels and are really living hand to mouth, and they may feel they just can't afford it, even though they're attached to their unions. Now,
20 seconds. Who might stick together?
I think the construction industry unions will stay together, and I think they will do so because for several reasons. First, many of them have been trained by their unions. They are attached to the unions because they don't work for any one employer. They are itinerant.
I'll give you the rap they're giving me, but we'll keep it going on the
And
Facebook
let me tell
live
you
stream.
what right to work really
We'll,
means.
we'll talk about it. We're going to keep it going.
It's putting
Thanks
a
for watching. We'll see you
target
next
on
week.
the back of workers everywhere.
Not everybody brings their own props.